This is an extract from The Last Day, which is my translation of Owain Owain's 1976 sci-fi novel, Adydd Olaf. Of course, the unnatural skin of the hands which greeted us, the residents of Level 3, didn't trigger any negative sensations or reaction in the others. There is no command in their assimilation program that reads, event, touch of skin, reaction, unnatural sensation, event symptoms. They cannot react negatively to the touch. The touch of skin on skin. This morning, to me, I felt a jolt in that touch. The jolt of fear, perhaps? Twice, many years ago, before the present regime took over, did I experience such a thing. Once was with Mam, the last touch of my lips against her forehead. The jolt of fear? No, not fear. No emotion of any kind. Though isn't the absence of all emotion itself an emotion? Nothing, no reaction, no recognition, no nothing. That's why I felt such a jolt. Just the utter lack of reaction. Skin, totally aware of the touch of skin. No sensation, no empathy, no chill from the cold either. Just empty, unfeeling distance. The disconnected isolation from that awful proximity. Touching without touch, so close, and the gulf in between so infinitely massive, and that profound jolt, the perfect negation of every jolt to ever come before, from my mother's first touch to her last moments of unknowing, electrifying the skin. The other was the first time with Anna at school, the perfection of first touch, a simple event, borrowing a book, our fingers touching, perhaps by accident, skin kissing skin in total innocence for a split second, the slightest moment, and that simple touch paralyzing my whole body with a torturous, totally real electrical jolt. I knew my feelings for Anna back then. Did she know? Then or any other time? It's hard to believe she didn't know. Hadn't that electricity been coursing through her body too? Hadn't our shared consciousness created it? There was an echoes, a handful of times afterwards, each one different. The shock of discovering what I'd been imagining all the while. Yes, her skin was pale and smooth and warm and alive, and the shock of discovering what I had never imagined, that the intertwining of bodies is not only a physical act.
So this is a reading from This House by Sean Northey, which is a translation done by me of her first novel, which is called Anna Tihon. So in this extract, Anna, the main character, used to walk with her dog Meg to Nantyraer, an isolated house in the hills, to escape a troubled home life. Goodness knows exactly why she headed there that day. A postponed meeting had freed her up for the whole afternoon. The weather was gorgeous. A song from her childhood had been on the radio and then circling in her head all morning. Maybe that was why. She liked to think it was fate, a coincidence engineered by someone or something. Whatever the reason, she drove to her childhood home, parked there and started to walk. The rough track running alongside the lake, then a path leading through the gap between two small hills. Up she climbed, somewhat out of breath, to the flat rock, and then she looked down, half afraid. Afraid it wouldn't be there, afraid it would be a ruin, or that some bugger would have tastelessly done it up and stuck a conservatory on the front, or that the Forestry Commission would have planted up the surrounded land. But no, from the distance at least, it looked exactly as it had a quarter of a century earlier, seeming to grow out of the rock, the stream running in front of it. Perhaps the fields were more overgrown with rushes, but to all intents and purposes it was the same. She looked down at her legs, expecting to see the bare brown legs of an 11-year-old, and gazed in surprise at the thighs of a woman in her 30s. She almost called for Meg to follow her on the last stretch down the slope and along the flat ground to the house. The doorway of Nantyraer was wide, with stones laid edgewise to form an archway. When she was a child, the door was made from oak planks, without decoration, without paint or varnish, and it was still the same now. She walked straight up to it and, out of force of habit, put her thumb on the latch and pushed. And for the first time ever, the door opened. It swung open easily, all the way, wide open. There was no time to falter, to think twice. The room was decorated very simply, with a roaring fire in the large fireplace at the far end, the ingle nook stacked high with logs. But it was a room without a living soul. She stepped inside. There was a bowl of fruit on the circular oak table, and without thinking, she took up a handful of grapes and ate them unhurriedly, one by one, while looking slowly and contemplatively around the room. "And who's been eating my fruit?" said Daddy Bear, thundered a voice from somewhere above her head. She dropped the grapes that were still in her hand, and by the time she'd returned towards the voice, she was 34 years old again. On the open landing at the far end of the room stood a man who was obviously in the middle of dressing, jeans, feet bare, his shirt in his hands, and his hair wet. "I'm sorry, I don't normally. You must think that—" Mid-stammer, she noticed that the eyes above her were sparkling and the mouth was trying hard not to laugh at her. "Take a seat. I'll be down in 2 minutes to tell you what I think." Anna looked towards the open door. If she'd had a car outside, she'd have bolted. But the thought of trying to outrun him over the moorland and up onto the higher slopes, or down the rough track through the valley in the direction of the sea, stopped her. Or maybe she craved a longer stay in Nanterre. She sat down in one of the armchairs in front of the fire, in almost exactly the spot where she sat now, and waited. She did not have long to wait. The man, tall and still barefoot, came down the steep wooden stairs, but with his shirt on now, with his shirt on now, and carrying a towel to dry his hair. As he passed the front door, he gave it a shove to close it, to keep the heat in. The door was solid, and she knew it was the only one. "Cup of tea?" Thanks. No milk or sugar." "Lemon? Earl Grey? Darjeeling?" He disappeared through the door opposite her, and Anna remained sitting in stunned surprise. The last thing she'd expected that morning was a cup of Earl Grey tea in Nanterre. From the direction of the kitchen she could hear the sound of crockery, but neither of them made any attempt at conversation between the two rooms. Anna looked around. She made a conscious effort to try and remember it all, in case she was never given the chance to be within the walls of Nanterre again. She was looking at a picture on the wall when he came back into the room, carrying 2 china mugs of tea and a chocolate cake. He handed her the tea and went to sit in front of the fire, obviously expecting her to follow suit. Johan Gwilym," he said, smiling that smile again. "Anna Morris, look, I'm sorry, the door has never been open before. I didn't know there was anyone here. I've been wanting—" The cheeky so-and-so was laughing at her again. Anna reached for a piece of cake to hide her confusion and took a bite. "Oh, this is good. Did you make it yourself, Mr. Gwilym?" Stupid question. Would a man in the middle of nowhere spend his time baking chocolate cakes on the off chance that someone would call by for tea? She'd best make her excuses as soon as possible, she thought, before she did or said anything else stupid. "Johan," he said, "if you're going to walk into my house and help yourself to fruit, we'd better be on first-name terms. And yes, I made the cake." Looking back, perhaps that was the moment Anna fell in love with him. "It's pretty good, Johan."
Hello, my name is Emyr Wallace Humphreys, and I translate from Portuguese and Welsh to English and English to Welsh. And I'm originally from here in Aberystwyth, but I was born in St Asaph, and currently I live in the middle of nowhere in Powys. I first started translating, or should I say I first started my literary translation career when I was in Brazil. I had recently graduated from the University of Liverpool studying Latin American studies, and found myself in Brazil and made friends with other writers and dancers and artists and musicians, and I found my time there really inspiring. And so I was doing a lot of creative writing at the time, and as part of the same impulse I decided to translate their texts. I then went to London, to UCL, to study a master's in translation studies before coming back to mid Wales about 5 years ago and really beginning my translation career, I guess, for real, if that makes sense, in the sense that I now work as a translator into Welsh and also from Welsh and Portuguese, and translate literature as well. So I translate non-literary texts and literary texts. And so far, everything's been going to plan. When I first started translating, my good friend Sergio Troncini inspired me, mostly because of the short stories that I was reading. And he was one of the first people I translated before really understanding what literary translation, whatever that means, kind of was. I just decided to translate his stuff because it was great and it helped me learn Portuguese. And around the same time as well, I read Blood-Drenched Beard by Daniel Galera, who is from Porto Alegre, the city that I was staying in, and translated by Alison Entrekin, which first started me on the, I suppose, journey or the path of literary translation, in which I began to learn what exactly or who exactly was translating these books and their careers and how they got there, and that really started me down this rabbit hole, which basically has seen me here really in Aberystwyth filming this. When I was in UCL, I found the Brazilian Translation Club extremely influential, actually, because at the time I was still thinking about creative writing as my main creative output while doing translation as well. I thought I could pay the bills as a translator and then try and make it with, I don't know, some sort of novel or short story collection and go down that route. But by the end of my time in by the end of my time in London, I was 100% committed to literary translation as my main literary output. And that was to do with basically a group of people coming together and really just hashing out translations together pretty much every month or every 6 weeks. And it really worked as an incubator and was I think it's the first published literary translation I had. And so that was really important for me. And then, everything pretty much has been a continuation from that sort of incubation period. I think everything has come from Porto Alegre and then London quickly afterwards, and it's just rode the wave up to now, really.
Hello, I'm Susan Walton. I'm a Welsh to English literary translator. This is being recorded in Aberystwyth, and I was born not far from here in a time when we still used shillings to pay for things. My main work for the last 15 years has been as a freelance proofreader and editor of English, and on the side I'm also a literary translator, but I didn't start off this way. I've had a checkered education and a checkered employment history, and I've also had a patchy relationship with the Welsh language. I grew up in Wales, but with a monoglot English family that was also culturally English. The vast majority of my social life when I was growing up was conducted through the English language. I had to do compulsory Welsh at school, of course, but back then there wasn't the same emphasis on the language as there is now, and I failed my Welsh O-level exam at 16. And that was that, or so I thought. I was unemployed on and off for 3 years after I left school, and then I went to a higher education college to train as a cartographer. This was pre-digital, when maps were drawn by hand and reproduced by photomechanical processes. As a result of that HND, Higher National Diploma, I worked as a technical assistant in several local authority planning departments. After realising that I'd need Welsh to work in the public sector back home in North Wales, and after many evening classes, I got my Welsh O-level at the age of 27. I secured a job with the Snowdonia National Park, now the Eryri National Park Authority, which is located within an area of Wales with a high proportion of Welsh speakers. This meant I moved to live in a very culturally Welsh area. In that post, I had a year's post-O-level day release classes in Welsh, which further improved my capabilities. Also, my spoken skills were greatly improved by sitting in the pub, holding broken conversations in Welsh and frantically writing down new words in a notebook. After working for the National Park for 5 years, I went to university in Bangor as a mature student and got a master's in rural resource management. I worked then in various public and voluntary bodies in roles that aimed to make the countryside more accessible to people and to encourage the use of the outdoors for physical exercises. I ended up as the national coordinator in Wales for the Walking the Way to Health project, its pilot stage. However, by my mid-40s, I had some health issues of my own. I decided that working from home and at my own pace would be better for me than working in an office, which is what I was doing at the time. I decided to retrain as a proofreader and I started my business, Zoo Proof. Through my proofreading work, I was in contact with publishing houses in Wales and was asked by Myrddin Ap Dafydd, the boss at the publisher Gwas Carreg-Gwalch, to translate poetry selections for a bilingual book called Hyd a Lledrith Llyn, Llyn, a Magical Place, into English, which is this. My Welsh reading skills were still quite shaky at that point. Just to note, I later learned that being asked to translate literature is quite rare. Translators mostly pitch books they think would work in translation to publishers rather than the other way around. Since then, I've translated another 13 books for Gwas Carreg-Gwalch, including 8 novels for older children. Through doing this, my reading skills have improved. I also took the basic Welsh to English translation test to qualify for membership of the Cymdeithas Cyfieithwyr Cymru, the Association of Welsh Translators and Interpreters, although I'm no longer a member. In 2020, I was the recipient of a mentoring award that was jointly funded by Wales Literature Exchange, Literature Wales and the National Centre for Writing. This helped me to expand into translating adult literary fiction, and the outcome of is my first translation of a novel for adults. It's come out called This House, which was published by 3 Times Rebel Press in March 2024. It is a translation of the well-known Welsh author Sian Northy's first novel called Yn y Tŷ Hwn, which is this. The first and only, so far, adult book that I've done, adult literary novel that I've done.
Which I have read as well.
Yes. So we're in the same boat in a certain sense, in that we've both got our first literary novels coming out, or coming out, and we've both been on mentored journeys with them. Me through Wales Literature Exchange plus Literature Wales plus National Centre for Writing, and you through just National Centre for Writing, yeah?
Yeah,
is that
that's
right?
Yeah. So I first, it was first I thought about Portuguese to English, and they have specific languages into English.
Mm.
And then the final one was the Visible Communities Mentorship, which was for POC people, or speakers of community, minority, or heritage languages, I think. And so I replied with Welsh as my heritage language and also as a minority language as well.
Mm.
And so yeah, that's how I got that mentorship, and yeah, managed to sort of ride that wave really with my translation of Dydd Olaf by Emyr Wallace, and it basically the entire process. It started before the mentorship, but it was absolutely like key to getting.
And did you concentrate on that throughout your mentorship, or did you do other bits?
Yeah, definitely that.
Just concentrate. Yeah, I did the same with mine, because some of the other people that were being mentored, because I was the only for that year. I happened to hit it with a pilot year where they gave money, or gave there was no money, gave a menteeship to a translator, but so all my cohort were all creative writers of some sort or another. And some of them were concentrating on one thing, but some of them were also sort of maybe dipping their toes into other things, and it wasn't all one project. But I just wanted to do one thing, and you've done the same thing with yours. Or,
Yeah.
or was that part of what you had to do?
No, I don't think there were any criteria. I'm pretty sure everyone happened to have a specific project that they wanted to work on, and so they did. Yeah, I think that the mentorships themselves, and I might actually have to ask them personally, like my co-mentees, whether it was just concentrating on one thing. But I knew some people had their original books, and they were, we went to London Book Fair afterwards, or at the end of the mentorship to basically push these pitches. But yeah, there were things like pitch workshops, and it all depended on the language and the mentor and what you wanted out of it and your particular relationship to the mentor. So mine was Mina Kandasamy, who naturally didn't speak Welsh, and so a lot of it wasn't about these specific. They weren't about specific feedback about the translation choices between the languages, more about just the effect of the language itself, which was still super insightful. And she was responsible for many translation choices that I made that ended up on the final version. But I know someone who changed book like mid mentorship, but she still managed to use all of the connections that she made at London Book Fair and during the mentorship to land another contract. And I think she's got multiple books on the horizon now. So it was the first time because I didn't know whether it was going to be translated, whether it was going to be published or not. So I was always used to just doing pitches, right? Just doing small extracts here and there, and actually concentrating an entire year. Well, actually, technically 2 years, because I started it before and kept on kind of fiddling with it afterwards, and also the application process after it basically carried on after the mentorship, and so it was interesting, because it became just part of my life. I was doing my day job, and then I would just shut that laptop, and then go for a walk or whatever, then open the laptop and work on that.
So did you learn stuff from the other mentees, the other people that were being mentored in other languages, or was it more to do with the relationship with your mentor?
That's a good question. No, I was quite. It's not that they didn't teach me anything, but I think.
I didn't mean formally, but but that you were. Maybe you were in events where you were sort of earwigging what somebody else's mentor was telling them and thinking, oh yeah, that applies to me as well, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. We're all friends. We have a WhatsApp group, and we text each other here and there, and we met up at London Book Fair, and it was great. They were all really cool, and so we absolutely kind of it was like a cross pollination of all of our ideas, our experiences. If one of us found a link to something specific to apply for, they'd put it in the group, and then and we'd all be able to, or at least some of us would be able to apply for that. And so it was really good. And because I think literary translation is there is absolutely no way into it, or getting your foot in the door. I don't know if there's a foot or a door there. It's just it's obviously very very competitive and oversaturated, but still we really just rather collaborate with each other when we can.
Because of me, I had such a sort of strange route into it. I wasn't setting out to be a literary translator. I just got asked to do the Llyn book, and it's just kind of grown from there. So it's all been a bit haphazard, and I've had to educate myself mostly through the internet, although obviously being mentored helped. But once the mentorship year was finished, and I only had, within that year, there were only 3 sessions with my mentor. I was on my own. So
pretty much.
I had to teach myself, I'm kind of attending online workshops about how to pitch and this sort of thing. But a lot of that is geared for authors, not for translators, as I discovered. For example, I was in my ignorance, I was pitching to agents, and most translators don't have agents,
Yeah, that's
for
right.
example, which I had to learn sort of as I went along.
Yeah, that's right. Although one of my co-mentees, Vaibhav, he does have an agent, and he actually managed to get a literary translation contact, I think, through an agent. Although it is in the Indian context, because he is based in India, so I think it is.
Is it different?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. How
okay.
exactly? I'm not so sure from the top of my head, but
Okay.
yeah, it was a bit different.
Okay. Yeah, because, well, okay, in Britain, in that case, I should say, it seems to be. I only know two. One is a real sort of top translator, and I watched a Society of Authors presentation by him, and he mentioned that he had an agent. This is Frank Wynne, and the other I know is Manon Stefan Ross, but that may well be as much because of her author side of things than her translator side of things. I'm not sure what the reason is there, but she once the Blue Book of Nebo was in English, or was coming out in English, I think she had got an agent at that point.
Yeah, you touched upon that actually, upon something that I think about quite a bit with Welsh translation, in that there are at least a handful of Welsh authors who also translate or have translated their
themselves.
own things.
Yeah.
And it's I can't pretend like it's not a problem or an obstacle when I see something and I'm like, oh, I'd really like to translate that, and find out that the author or even somebody else is translating that. But it's also, I think it's just one of the it's a sign of, it's like a trait of a minority language, perhaps, of people who are these authors who are extremely good at language in general, and because they're surrounded by English as much as Welsh if they want to be, they tend to be really good, and therefore they have a very good stake in their own translations. But the way I see it, because I translate from Portuguese, I see it as too many people doing Portuguese to English or Spanish to English, and therefore if you have an idea, someone else has most likely taken it, or another publisher is going ahead with it. It's kind of like the same idea, It's difficult either way, really, and you just got to do it I at least do it for the love of it, I enjoy it, I read something, I like it, and then I want to translate it, really.
But I can see the point of doing it. I mean, I think if I was an original writer and was equally proficient in two languages, well, why not?
Yeah.
You do it yourself, you've got control over it, you get paid twice, you get twice the royalties.
Yeah, not just 3% or whatever.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. Especially if, because translators are paid up front for the labour of actually translating it, so you basically just get, well, if it's done ethically and done correctly, you get the money up front, or at least
in stages.
Yes.
Milestones. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was different with all of these, because I get, again, unusually, which I then discovered was unusual after I'd done several, I get paid by the hour for these, but I don't get any royalties. So they've done like a commercial translation, like you translate a report or something. Mm-hmm. So they're done like that. And I also do quite a lot of fact checking and things as well. And
yes, and I think, it's interesting, isn't it? I don't know if liminal's the word. That sounds a bit hipsterish, a little bit, I don't know, bit lofty, but it is a very liminal kind of thing to be, which is a literary translator.
Yeah, well, I think by now as well, I think the last two I've done for Mother Up David, he's also asked me to read the Welsh before it's gone to print. I mean, I can't correct the Welsh grammar and whatnot, because my Welsh isn't good enough for that. But I think he's thought that the sort of things I'm bringing up that sometimes cause me problems when I'm translating, that if they've been solved before the Welsh version has even gone to print, then it obviously makes my life easier as well. Plus,
Yeah, that's
hopefully, he'll end up with a better product in the Welsh originals as well. So the last two, I've looked at a draft text of the Welsh before it's gone to print, which kind of affects the translation as well, because I don't know which way you do this, but and up until that point, I'd always translated without reading through it.
Yes.
I've just because I think you're doing it from the point of view of the reader. I mean, okay, sometimes it means you have to go back if you suddenly realise that there's some hint of something that's coming further along in the story. I mean, I have to say that for the children's books, they're kind of adventure stories. There's not usually a great deal of sort of subtle foreshadowing or anything that you have to go back and kind of think, oh, I better make this a bit different because it needs to come up later in the story or whatever. But you do sometimes need to go back and change things. But that's how I'd done it before. And then having the last couple, having read the Welsh before translating and getting the whole thing, I'm hoping it's not going to badly affect it in terms of you might be missing something or assuming something because you've already got it in your head because you've already read it. But yeah, I think because I'm not trained, I don't know what the standard practice is supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't think
what do they teach you? What did they teach you when you did your masters?
Well, funnily enough, they that's a big question, because the masters it's almost, you could make your own thing, like just it's like colouring in whatever you want, which is it was really good in that sense. So the masters itself, I did a research masters, and so half of the entire degree was an 18,000 word long dissertation, and then the other half pretty much were the modules that you had to do basically. And so a lot of that was translation theory. I was going to do literary translation because there was a specific module about literary translation, but for work purposes, I was also working while I was studying. I couldn't really do that, but I ended up going with translation history, which was really interesting. And actually, I found doing translation history, and then instead of doing other modules in translation studies, I actually did a 4th year Portuguese program, which was looking at Brazilian Portuguese literature with Professor Ana Cláudia Soriani da Silva, who was also my dissertation supervisor. And at that time, actually, it was about 6-7 years ago now, I had the idea of basically going from Portuguese to English, but for various reasons in the intervening years, I steadily incorporated more Welsh into the practice. Although I still do lots of Brazilian Portuguese and Brazilian literature, and it's the language that I basically fell in love with. It's just a beautiful language, and so around that time, a lot of it was Brazilian Portuguese related, and so the dissertation itself was mostly centered around that, I think.
Okay.
And so I went into UCL a couple of times, and then most of the degree was just do dissertations in libraries between walking dogs. I was also a dog walker while I was doing the dissertation.
Oh.
So it was pretty cool. It's pretty,
So they didn't teach you any sort of, right, this is like the normal standard way of doing it?
No, although you could have. If I remember correctly, there were 3 dissertations for the masters. One was the research one, which I did. Another one was a literary or translation commentary.
Yeah.
So you had to translate, X amount of words and then write an X word long essay on
how you did it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think through that, people kind of learned whether it was, I don't know, good or bad. I'm not sure if that's I don't know. But a lot of it was just like lofty translation.
This is one
theory.
thing that snookers me a bit with some places that one might want to apply to submit something. Some of them, they want like a commentary, and I haven't got that.
Yeah, indeed.
I can't do that because it's just like, it's just a translation, man.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think, you know, Danny Hunt, he doesn't read his stuff before. Gregory Rabassa as well, who did, you know, Gabriel Garcia Marquez and many other very, very popular authors from Latin America. He didn't as well. You know, I think if you want to make money from literary translation, any amount really, I don't really have time to do the entire thing.
Yeah, that's another point. Yeah.
Except for The Last Day, because
well, it's not very long for a start.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's actually, I was quite surprised at how short it was because you'd sent it to me to read in Word. It was easy to see how long it was.
Yeah.
And I was quite surprised how short. It's basically a long short story.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the book itself. Well, I came across the book basically when I was beginning to do more Welsh and starting to basically retrain myself.
Was this before it got reissued?
Ooh, just around the same time. In fact, I read the online version first, then it got reissued,
right.
And then I read the published edition.
The Glasgow Buthin reissue, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I wondered whether that is what had prompted you, or whether you knew about it already.
Oh yeah, I'd known about it for a couple of years at that point, mostly through Gwenno. I went to see her play live in London when I was doing my doing the masters, and it was right towards the end of the degree.
Yeah.
And I got invited to some music festival, and just saw her on the program, and I just thought, oh yeah, Gwenno, she's Welsh, might as well go there.
Yeah.
And all my friends wanted to go and see someone else. Can't remember who it was now.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so I nipped away to go to the Louvre, and then just caught the tail end of a set, and I thought, oh my god, she's great! Like, I really liked her stuff, and so that was enough for me to just listen to all her music and
through that,
yes, exactly. But actually, how I managed to do Diddorol, how it became the project that basically stuck with me for a number of months was through Bristol Translates. It was a couple of years ago now. And what happened was there was a multilingual translation option, and I had the idea at that point, or the idea was to translate from Portuguese to English, like to do literary translation, just on the side, and just do as much as possible, and then do translation into and from Welsh to like pay the bills, which is kind of what I'm doing now, but also with Welsh as well, doing with Welsh literary work coming in as well. And basically, that's what happened. I applied with just a little piece of Diddorol first, and I got the bursary for that. And I was like, oh, that's great, and I really enjoyed it. And then just expanded that extract and sent it to the NCW for the mentorship that year, or later that year. So that's 2022 now. So it's been about 2 years since Diddorol was part of my life. But that's the only one really that I've read that I'm thoroughly well versed with. Most things I translate when they come, and it depends if they are what's the word, if they're on spec. I think there are things that I would like to get translated, and there are certain things that people send me, not loads. Like I'm not hot property on the Portuguese and Welsh translation market, but here and there, some people kind of
historic time. All the novels, the children's novels that I've translated, they're all set in historic time. They're all set in past periods. So I have to get my head into that period, but also the language has to be not too difficult, and because I think children might, if I was trying to do a pastiche of Dickens or something, I think that children would probably stop reading.
Yeah, it's true, yeah.
So you've got a slightly different angle on it because your author was actually writing at a period some years ago, 70s? Is it 70s or 80s?
Yeah, I think he wrote, along
Yeah.
along the 20th century. But
Yeah.
I think the really interesting thing about it is, Owain was, if I'm not mistaken, he was in his 40s when he wrote Y Dydd Olaf, and it's set across the 20th century. So it's set in the 40s, the 80s, and 1999, which is really interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
But some of the stuff when he's younger, it's interesting because I feel that there are sayings or ways of saying things, or a way he writes certain things. First of all, in his dialect, I do hear a Gog accent when I read the Welsh, but also he might have been picking up language from when he was a young man or when he was a boy, who might have been used by people who were older than him or a generation.
Oh yeah, I picked you up on a couple of these, didn't I, when I was reading through it for you?
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, because I'm so much older than you, I can remember the first time I heard some of the things that you'd put in as there's a commonplace these days.
Exactly. Yeah. And there was in the editing process that was the same thing. There was, I think I think I kept digs in for university.
Yeah.
I know for where he lives, for where Mark lives.
I think that was okay.
Yeah, but in the novels,
things that I picked up as being sort of Americanisms.
Yes, yeah, there's a lot of that. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a product of my own.
Well, yeah, of course. You're younger and you won't remember this, but I sometimes see this even in original writing that's set in the historical period. I'm kind of thinking, no, they wouldn't have said that then. I can remember that.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
There were always these decisions I took, which were, do I want to completely just take that over and this is an all new book by me. I am the translator.
Oh
this
yeah,
is my
sure.
project.
I mean, if it had been consistent.
Yeah.
But if it had been consistent, I wouldn't have commented on it. But it seemed quite clear that for most of it, you wanted to stick to the 1940s-ish language for the 1948 bit.
But the thing is, but I wasn't. Obviously, I'm not translating in that time period, so obviously it is garbled. But I did want to try and get the kernel of the language that he might have heard.
Yeah.
So there were loads of things that could have been sayings.
Yeah.
And I might have lost them by translating them or adapting them. You know what I mean? Like, there's always this.
Yeah. You're always going to lose. It's the same with historical dramas on the telly and stuff like this. I mean, you look at, say, the film of Far From the Madding Crowd with Julie Christie in it, and it's supposed to be set in the 19th century, but her makeup is pure 60s because that's when the film was made. It's I don't know whether you just call it artistic license. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's only so much you can really do without thoroughly going through it with the author. So you had that luxury with Mervyn, and I could have emailed Robin and Owain Owain's estate, but also I gave them pretty much the entire second or third draft, and they were like, "That's great." So I'm like, "Okay, sure." So it's just one of those things, right? Just if Owain Owain would have heard that when he was younger, that might have been kernels of Welsh from the 19th century that we might not pick up on it now, which is it does kind of fire my imagination that So I had to be, I wouldn't say careful. I definitely gave it a lot of consideration, but just aware of all these layers of
There was something
history.
I can't remember what it was now, but there was something in the Wild Geese short story. Maybe it was to do with the stamps, with having the line and the stamps, because I remember stamps being like that, with a line in them, which was some kind of old way of the beginnings of mechanisations for machines to be able to recognise what denomination stamp was on a letter, that you'd put the right stamp on, on the letter. But I was thinking, nobody's going to understand what that means now.
Yep, no, I don't. Basically.
I'm just going to read a couple of the poems from this book. It's primarily like kind of a coffee table book of nice pictures of Penllyn. And there were selections of poetry, a lot of them traditional little rhymes, quite a few by Jaglin Davis and one or two by other people. When I was asked to do this job, this is the poem I translated as a sample. It's from Miraglau Môr by Cynan. Modrist yw'r crig wylanod, trwy niwl yr hwynos oer, pan hed ysbrydion heibio yng ngolau gwan y lloer. And I translated this as, so sad the seagull's cries through the fog of cold midnight, when spirits drift in way moonlight. This is one of the Jaglin Davis ones. It's called Pothlyn Llain. I don't know whether it's an extract or not. A thrymgwrs tawel ar y tai, ar llongau danin, a chiriad ysgafn tôn ar drai, ochnaid wedyn. In bottomless sleep the houses lie, reflecting the ships below, moving lightly on the ebbing waves, a sigh followed by a sigh. Oh, this is quite an interesting one. It was a sort of street crier's cry. The Nefyn in Llyn was very famous for its herrings. So this is just a traditional street cry. Prynwch benwaig Nefyn, ni bu ei bath am torri newyn, cefna fel ffarmwrs, boliar tafarnwrs, prynwch benwaig Nefyn, newydd ddod o'r môr. Buy our neving herrings, the very thing to satisfy your hunger. Backs like farmers, boozers' bellies, buy our neving herrings, fresh from the sea. And the last one. Oh, this is one of the kind of traditional old verses, but I quite like this one. I was quite proud of this one because I managed to work in the four elements of fire, water, earth and air. Ni chair gweled mwy o'n hôl, nag ôl neidr ar y ddôl, neu ôl llong aeth dros y tonnau, neu ôl saith mewn awyr denau. No more will I see my firelight shadow, nor the snake's imprint in the meadow, nor the ship's wake across the waves, nor the arrow's trail in thin air.
Well, you asked me about what I studied in university, and two of the modules were heavily theory-based, and I found it interesting, but the main idea behind many of them, in my opinion at least, were just, and this could be just me being really ignorant here, they were mostly just rehashes of I forget which saint it is now, the patron saint of translation, who said, I write heart for heart, not word for word, or sense for sense, not word for word. I can't believe I'm fudging that out because so many literary translators are they're very familiar with that, and I've completely blanked his name. But what I'm trying to say is there are so many different theories which are essentially just rehashes of that, sense for sense or word for word. And so there are many, there's a sort of theory, well, there is a theory out there, a standpoint in which when you read something, the translator's invisibility, it's, if you do a really good job and it reads fluidly, that's really bad for the translator because you're not being aware that you're
reading the translation.
Exactly, but the thing is, I thought, well, surely if you're a literary translator and you do an excellent job and it flows, that also makes you think that you're reading a translation. But again, that's me being maybe very ignorant and very kind of cavalier about the whole thing. But it's the thing that I got from the novel. It's it's crystal clear, and that's what I like. You know, I think it obviously you're not reading the original. That's, you know, you're not. I don't think it's a transmission between the source language and the new language. It's an interpretation, but it's an interpretation that made me at least imagine that I was reading the original and kind of going into like. You know,
have you read Anna Tihon? Have you read the original?
No, I have not. Although I went to your discussion last week, so I had a few things from Shan. So yeah, I haven't. Yeah. But almost
you don't want to.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, exactly. I think it reminded me of Flor Thompson de Vere. I think that's her name, and I think I'm pronouncing that right. Her translation of the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, which is a sort of like the Brazilian Dickens, if there is one, or basically a classic Brazilian novel, and it was just so pitched so perfectly. I hadn't read that in Portuguese yet, but I was like, it almost made me feel like I didn't want to. You know what I mean? Like it was just that good, and that's exactly the sensation I got when I read this house.
Wow.
But really, it was just.
Well, I mean, I haven't read the Dír d'Olaf, so I don't know. Again, I can't compare and contrast, sort of thing. But the thing, as I've said with the short story, the Owain Owain short story that I read a bit of before, you could see it. You could see that you'd echoed the same sort of things that I was echoing in that. That he's obviously got quite a strong author voice.
Yes. Yeah.
Even from work to work, because sometimes authors, you know, you couldn't tell it's the same author that has written some. You'd read something, and if you didn't know what the name was on the cover, you wouldn't necessarily go, "Oh, this is definitely a so and so." But I think I haven't read it further, but I would imagine that possibly with Owain Owain, you'd go, "Oh, this is Owain Owain, Owain," regardless of, you know, what it was. You'd recognise the voice.
Oh, as soon as I read your translation, I was I can absolutely. I think a lot of that as well has to do with punctuation. Yeah. He uses it so markedly. Yeah. And I must admit, I took some liberties on that front because there were just so many M dashes and exclamation after exclamation after exclamation. Yeah. That had I tried to render that faithfully, I don't know the word, but like had I tried to render it more word for word. Yeah. It would have just truncated the whole reading experience. Yeah. So I feel, and that's up to you or anyone else to decide, it feels a bit more novelistic than the original. Because it's an epistolic novel, so there are letters, diary entries and things, but it strikes a really good balance because you can hear the different characters' voices, but you can definitely tell it's from Owain Owain's mind. Yeah. And I think it's a really good duality when you're reading it. But just to make sense in the English, I had to just make paragraphs larger and cut down a little bit. Still lots of M dashes and lots of things, and interjections and things. Yeah. But I had to just rein it in a little bit. Yeah. There's a really interesting thing that I'm just going to note that when I did the literary translation course with Daniel Hahn, that he heard from someone that you shouldn't translate punctuation, you should punctuate the translation. Yeah, really, of course.
Yeah. I cull a fair number of ellipses from Merthin Abdaf's writing as well.
Oh, okay. Is he one for?
He's one for ellipses, and sometimes I think that they don't quite work. But he's never. I mean, he obviously, because as I say, I'm doing those translations for Gwas Carreg Gwalch in a kind of translating a report sort of framework almost. It does mean that he reads the translations and he's got the final say.
Yeah, that's good.
Because so he's both the author and the publisher, and he has the final say. And I can sort of suggest stuff, but if he doesn't want it in, or if he doesn't want, he doesn't like the way that I've altered something, like cutting down on ellipses, he can just say, I don't want this.
That's great. I mean, that's the advantage of working with a living author.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. You were in, because same with Sian. I mean, actually, Sian and I didn't work that closely with this house because, well, partly because she's laid back and she's quite because like yeah, get on with it. But she did read it, and there was a few things that I had to get her approval for, including changing the title from "In This House" to "This House."
Ah, that's correct. Yeah.
I just thought it worked better in English. Do you think it works better in English than "In This House"?
I think so. I don't know. I'm not the right one to ask, because I think when I translate titles and translate anything, I go through so many of the different options that I see good parts in everyone and every choice, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
So for example, like last day, it could have been the final day, but I went with the last day.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting, because I'd automatically thought it was called a dydd olaf, the last day.
Yeah.
Even before I knew you were translating it, 'cause I mean I knew the title.
Yeah.
Because when it came out in with Gwasg y Bwthyn, I was looking at it and my brain was translating it as the last day.
Yeah, and that's how my brain translated it. But I just remember seeing, I think it's the Wikipedia page. It was translated at that point. It's changed in the meantime as the final day.
The final day.
Yeah,
Oh right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, in terms of sense, it makes equal sense.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'll go back to "In This House" and "This House" first of all. I think what that does is place the house very much so as a character, and it very much so comes across as a character in the novel itself. It's everywhere. Obviously it is mostly set in
Spoilers.
this house. That's it.
No, that's fine. But just like
yeah.
Okay.
Remember when the when it happens then.
No, but also I don't know. It's difficult to explain this sort of rationally, but "In This House" seems to me to be the sort of. It sounds like the start of a nursery rhyme somehow. It's kind of like, "In this house there lived a man," and da 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 da. It sounded like that. Whereas "This House" is more, "This house is, this house was, this house can, this house." It was that sort of lead rather than. It didn't sound as nursery rhyme-ish. I mean, I know it doesn't work. It doesn't work in it wouldn't have worked so well in Welsh. "Yn y tŷ hwn" sounds okay. Sounds better in Welsh than just "y tŷ hwn."
Yeah, now that I'm just running through it, I think that's 100% like consistent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that something that happened really early on? Were you like, in this house, or was it there until kind of later on in the process?
I think it was fairly early on. I can't remember now. I think it was fairly early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the first thing I noticed. I was like, why not "in this house"?
Yeah. Well, obviously, when names change.
Yeah.
I mean, the other ones, all these other ones, they're more, they're either literally translated or more or less, except for "Under the Welsh Knot," which was and "Besting Mr. Mostyn." Under the Welsh Knot was called Pren a Chansan.
Pren a Chansan.
In Welsh.
Yeah.
And I just thought, that's not going to mean... And then Merlin totally agreed straight away. It's not going to mean anything to anybody who doesn't know what the Welsh Knot is in the first place.
Yeah, indeed.
And also, the Welsh Knot is a kind of hook, because even if you know practically nothing about the Welsh language, people have heard of the Welsh Knot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
with "under" as well, it's like
under the Welsh
the
Knot,
looming of it.
Yeah. So that one was changed. I can't remember what Mr. Mostyn was called. Oh, Meester ar Mr. Mostyn, which is an idiom, was what the Welsh one was called.
It was an idiom.
It's an idiom, yeah. It kind of means getting the better of Mr. Mostyn.
I see.
To be the master on Mr. Mostyn. Yeah, so...
It just reminds me of the Master and Margarita. For some
yeah, so again, I came up with this, which I liked because it sort of... It's got the "Besting Mr. Mostyn." It sounds like just it alliterates, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
If it is alliteration in the middle of words.
Yeah, it's got a bit of a rhythm to it, for sure.
Besting Mr. Mostyn.
Yeah, indeed.
But all the others were more or less straightforward translations, because titles are really important.
Oh yeah, I mean
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
Some of my favourite literary translations, they have completely different titles.
Mm.
I mean, one that comes to mind is Phenotypes, which is by Paolo Scotch, translated by Daniel Hahn, and the original is like marrón y amarelo, which is brown and yellow, talking about pretty much skin types.
Oh,
So I was
right.
like, that one that's not going to fly in English
You need a
at all.
footnote to explain the title.
Yeah, indeed. And so they did a really good. They did a blind there actually by calling it phenotypes, because it's
Yeah.
a word that just comes up here
Yeah.
and there, and it talks about race, and I think it really
It
reflects
works.
it very well.
Yeah, sounds good. But it's one of those things that it's like covers as well. You don't, when you're translating, you're kind of busy, head down, blah blah blah, and then suddenly the publisher goes, cover, blurb. You know, it's just like, did you have to write your own blurb?
Well, funnily enough, because I was doing the pitching as well and all of that process,
Yeah.
and that's why I talked about literary translation as sort of like liminal, because you're kind of your own agent as well,
Yeah.
and you're a bit of a cheerleader, and
Yeah.
you're a reader, and you're doing all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff, unless you're being solicited to do these to do this work. I wrote a reader's report and a pitch and things, and I found out that got used as the blurb.
Oh.
So I wrote my own blurb without knowing it, really. But I must admit, it's a heck of a blurb. So I'm looking forward to seeing what people think about that.
Yeah.
Actually. It made me want to read it. Thinking about it. Not like tooting my own horn. That much.
But quite often, big publishers, I believe, they have people that specifically write blurbs.
Yeah. You
But-
can kind of tell, can't you, sometimes?
Yeah, I did. One of the things we haven't mentioned is what I decided when I was being mentored to blog about it, because I thought it was partly a way of me recording what was happening and stuff, and how things were changing, what I was thinking about it, and also a good sort of publicity stunt in a way. And when I got to having to think about blurbs, I mean, it's something that I actually did with the mentor in one of the sessions was, I said, look, I really need to know how to do this. So they gave me some pointers and gave me homework to do a blurb, and then critiqued it and what have you. And so in one of my blog posts, having looked at lots of blurbs of lots of books, I did a sort of blurb bingo.
Oh, I see. So you bought all the tropes and
So yeah. So it was just like how many. Well, also it's kind of how many times certain words appeared. In different. I mean, I just took a load of books off my shelves and read the blurbs for them and
it's a good way to go it.
to see how. Well, it's a scientific background. I've got a scientific background, and
okay.
I've treated a lot of this. I realised I was treating a lot of this more or less like field work. It's kind of like, okay, there's stuff out there. I've just got to tune in and observe it and record it. And, I started looking which publishers publish translations and which ones of those get reviews in The Guardian, because my boyfriend gets The Guardian, so it's easy. It's on
Guardian.
tap. It's on tap.
It's Guardian wherever you want.
He's a sandal wearing Guardian reader, but he's not vegetarian.
Oh, okay, not
and only sandals in the summer.
Bingo yet,
only sandals in the summer. Yeah, no, he hasn't got the full card sort of thing, but yeah, it's so I started doing that and started. Obviously, some of those don't take submissions without an agent. And what have you? So.
Yeah,
The other thing that was weird was, in terms of doing observational, just trying to collect data, as it were, was I did a lot of homework at the beginning of 2020. 2020 was the year I was being mentored, and I did a lot of homework at the beginning of 2020 as to when the submission windows opened with these various publishers that accepted translations. And then COVID came along, and loads of submission windows just shut. we're not accepting. So that was really difficult, because it wasn't just that they reopened after 2020, that some of them, they weren't accepting submissions for quite a while afterwards.
Yeah, I noticed that. I noticed some had closed, and I realised that they'd been closed since. Since COVID,
then.
basically.
Yeah.
Actually, it's only on the off chance that that I managed to get in contact with Parthian, actually, because I just said, I've emailed like the main email address. I said, I know you're not accepting anything, but if you're at London Book Fair, I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
And I did that with a couple of other publishers. I had a couple of meetings at London Book Fair by, and I don't know if this is like official information or whatever.
Don't say it on camera then.
Well, no, just if this is like done practice or if it's good or bad. But I basically just said, is anyone in London Book Fair? I'm going to be there. And then I just Trojan horsed the the translation in it by saying, oh, by the way, I'll be with this.
Yeah.
I'll be pitching this if you like it or not.
Yeah.
And actually, that was quite cool, because I met people there to meet them first. And like I remember, I forget who it was now, I think from World Editions, and I had a really nice meeting. They said, yeah, we're not interested in the book, but keep in contact. So it's like, all right, cool. Still was like, it wasn't wasted.
Yeah.
But I thought that was really cool.
I was supposed to go to London Book Fair in the year I was being mentored, but of course it didn't happen.
Yes, indeed. You went this year, right?
I went this year, which is kind of, in some ways, it would have, well, I can't say it would have been wasted if I'd have gone right at the beginning. But it was different, because this house it wasn't even out in bookshops, but I got some advance copies to give to anybody that I thought might review it or be interested.
Yeah.
And so I had that to sort of in my bag in the London Book Fair, so it gave me a kind of purpose rather than just kind of, oh hi, I've just started to do this.
Yeah. Well, funnily you mentioned that, because that's what I did first time round. I first went to London Book Fair in 2018, and just coming up towards the end of my masters.
Yeah.
And I went there with I managed to get, I think from the ETN email forum, I managed to get a free ticket, biked over there from like Camberwell.
Yeah, well, you're there already, so it's a big financial commitment for me.
Absolutely, yeah. That's exactly it, because I went there with nothing.
Yeah.
And I just went, hey, I'm Emyr, like really kind of like, hello. And I met Raoul Berry, the translator who he lives in Cardiff now.
Yeah.
And he was the British Library translator in residence at the time. And I literally just went there to say hello to people and met people, and then met them down the line later on. And then when I actually went last year, I didn't go this year, but when I went last year, I sort of knew how to negotiate it as well, and just. But it's also mostly to touch base with friends and colleagues, because we're all kind of suffering in the same boat of, like publishing limbo. If you want to kind of make it as a literary translator, translating full time, right? Which is another thing.
Yeah, which is another thing that's kind of nice for me, because for me it's more or less a sort of side hustle.
Yeah.
I'm not depending on it for. It's nice, and I'm very grateful to Mother David and Gwasgar Gwalf for, employing me to make all these.
Absolutely.
Because particularly when I started, I'd only just started my proofreading business, so I was still building up a client base, and it provided quite an important percentage of my business income in the first few years. But gradually, percentage-wise, although money-wise it's obviously gone up over time, but percentage-wise it's come down. But it's also very handy for me, because it means I can I was doing sort of 2 books a year, and I'm now doing 1 book a year for him, and it means that I can, because it's usually over about a 9-month period, I can slot it between other jobs. So it's really useful on that front as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Presumably you're the same, you can slot it between commercial translation jobs.
Yeah, so I work part-time for Coleg Gwent. That's my main kind of bill-paying job. And then the other part of my time is commercial translation, or any paying literary translation, which is not really not, how would I say, not regular.
Mm.
But yeah, I think we're very much in the same boat. I don't. At the beginning, when I was going to London Book Fair like years ago, I was like, yeah, I'm going to make a go of it. I'm going to do literary translation full time. I am a literary translator. But now, actually, I'm really happy for it to be it
must be incredibly difficult to make a living out of it.
Yeah, I don't think it's just books that you translate. You do workshops and other things. I think
I guess so.
the main literary translators either have been doing it for years and years and years, or they do other things as well, as in other literary things in the literary sphere. But
yeah, I suppose the sort of things Sian does with as an author, she goes into schools and
yeah, exactly.
does workshops and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, so that's basically something similar. Although I'm really happy with my job, and I'm happy at being a paid hobby with emphasis on the paid, just for colleagues. If I just do things gratis or do entire books gratis, then doesn't reflect ethically on literary translation, because it's a big undertaking. But it's, to me as well, it's a creative output, and it's the one that I decided to, I guess, commit to, right? Just the creative thing that I decided to share with people, because I did creative writing a lot in Brazil, and I still write here and there, but nowhere near as much as literary translation, and music as well. But music is very much so for myself, just messing around with the guitar here and there. So is the second extract from Owain Owain's The Last Day, translated by myself, coming out on June 6th on Parthian. I never did learn why they made us keep diaries, nor why they're microfilmed and fed to the computer general. Something to do with social studies, I think, discovering weaknesses in the system, the failures of their assimilation regime. Very clever, but not clever enough, because they forgot one little thing. The part of the Computer General's translation program that deals with sub-languages was deleted ages ago, and they don't know I know. The all-knowing Computer General doesn't speak my little language. This diary will be digested by his electronic stomach without so much as a hiccup. He'll find nothing forbidden here because he doesn't understand a word of this trivial language, and everything, forbidden or not, will be microfilmed and safely stored in his electronic memory. That's right, the whole diary, as well as instructions on how to find the other documents, the letters and all, stored in the final diaries section, subsection, unintelligible, sub-subsection, semi-logical. Brilliant. I'm lucky the electromagnetic messages from outer space, from Omega Delta, cause them trouble, haunt them. I'm lucky the Computer General's competence is finite after all, as he strains under the weight of responding effectively to Omega Delta's ambiguous messages, demanding the utmost from his computational programs, those which replace the sub-programs, which are now, according to them, obsolete. Those poor sods. A translation program the Computer General doesn't need anymore. It's the funniest thing. When will people, if that's what they are, be able to tell the difference between big and small, important and trivial? Everything will be made available for the coming ages, if they ever come, if they haven't been cut short by them. But for what purpose? If there are people left to read this diary, who will those readers be? Who will understand it, treasure it? It doesn't matter who. To me, right now, that's not what matters. Perhaps no one needs to read and understand it to find value in it. Isn't the making, the writing important? Doesn't acceptance or rejection come later? At the moment, it's sort of a scene now, and people from multiple languages can make friends, and they just associate with each other and meet at London Book Fair, and there's online forums and things like that, and groups and etc. I feel that with Welsh, there's you and me, Katie Gramick, I think, she translated a bunch of classics, and her daughter Lena now is also translating. But aside from that, I don't think there's anyone really around.
There's a new, Sian was telling me there's a new publisher called Felin Pipir.
Oh, melyn bapur, yeah.
Melyn bapur,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, melyn bapur is peppermill.
Peppermill.
Sorry. Yeah, that are looking to translate classics. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually have been in contact with Adam. So Adam is...
But for no money.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
100% royalties, but no money. So to me, we were talking about, in translation, for me at least, being a paid hobby.
Yeah.
I would... I'd love to do it for melyn bapur, but first of all, I do have to pay the bills.
Yes.
But also, I would, on the other hand, see it as a sort of... almost like a service in many ways for people who don't speak Welsh to get access to that literature, which I think is really important. And there's a bunch of stuff that's not been translated, considered classics, and then just, almost gone, almost like completely lost. And so I think that's important, but I think having the balance of...
Well, and also some of them, were even if they are translated, they've been translated so far back, it's time for a new version.
That too,
Yeah.
yeah. There's I have my eye on, well, not me personally, but I noticed is it Gweledigaethau'r Beirdd Cwsg?
Yes.
Yeah, the last translation of that was yonks ago now, and I think that would be a really cool, worthwhile project to take on.
No, it's been really interesting being able to, pick up on some of these things and talk at more length about them than just a passing, in a literary festival like we were in Llandeilo last week, and you get a quick and then somebody else wants to talk to you and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice to be able to just get into the nitty-gritty.
Indeed, and I think there's not many of us around, even though there are, a few of us, translating books, and so I think it's really important that that translation and literary translation is not just, and I'm thinking specifically from Welsh to English, that it's not just authors themselves doing that. And in fact, when they do, I've noticed this, when they do translate books, many times it doesn't say that they've been translated by the authors themselves. So if you walk into Waterstones or something, you don't actually know that some of these books in English have been translated.
Yeah.
And that's how kind of ideas of no one speaks the language, I went into Waterstones and I didn't see any translated books, that's how these sorts of ideas get formed, I think.
Yeah. I think so, yeah. So yeah, good. Raising the profile.
Absolutely.
Iawn?
Iawn.